I did want to record David for several different reasons. There's a lot of reasons. One of them was we're right in the thick of our Shimmer Festival here, and David's got a show at the Shimmer Festival, and I'm hoping to interview some of the artists that are a part of it, because I think there's so much to be learnt from people when it comes to finding out what they're doing, why they're doing it. And for me, the most exciting thing about going to see an exhibition is hearing the artists talk about their work. And this is our opportunity to just sort of to dig around it. But a part of this torture process comes, I have to ask you about where it started for you for art and where photography became a part of what you do, because I know you're not primarily a photographer, are you?
No, although it's what I'm doing most of all at the moment. I'm not really painting much at the moment, but I'd still, on balance, I guess I'm more of a painter than a photographer. But anyway, Shimmer is fantastic. I love it. And artist talks, I learnt so much from being in that forum and listening to the other photographers talking. It was great. But I started as studying science, physics, because when I was at school, it was the thing. You'd do science if you could. And
if you're smart enough to.
Yeah. It's like science is important. And I mean, I remember our lovely physics teacher, you can always pick up art later on, but you can't pick up mathematical physics later on. And it's kind of...
Is that right? Accurate?
Yeah, it's not really. But, I mean, I'd say you can't pick up mathematical physics later on, but I don't know whether you can pick up art later on either. It's a
good point.
Yeah, it's a romance to be seen. I'm still hoping that it might happen.
Do you think art, is it a language? Like they always say, languages should be learnt as a child. So perhaps they're accurate in that concept where if you want to be able to cope with physics as a mental gymnastics exercise, then you better start early.
Yeah, I don't know that I agree with that about art. I think there is something in it that's innate in a way, and I'm pretty old-fashioned in agreeing with Plato about the idea that there is this sublime somewhere that's unachievable, that we can't reach, and all our struggles of artistic endeavour are just imperfect reflections of that. And I did come to that conclusion. I didn't sort of pluck it out of the air. And the reason I was studying mathematical physics and pure maths was because I thought, well, this is the toughest stuff. This is like the purest knowledge you can get. It doesn't get any more fundamental than the forces that hold subatomic particles together, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're going to study anything, study that. Don't study chemistry because that's just applied quantum electrodynamics. Don't study, But, sorry, I'm going to cough. But when I got to the end of my undergraduate degree, I realised that while I loved physics and while I could never have done anything else. It has informed the way I see the world to this day. It was the end. That was the end of the road of it for me, because the reason I was studying it was because I thought I would have some glimpse into reality that I could only get that way. And then when you get to the end of the line, you discover that science is a self-consistent logical system.
Right.
And there is nothing more to it than that. I mean, it's tremendously useful. It's very good if you want to know how to build stuff or, cure cancer or whatever. But from a sort of philosophical, intellectual, epistemological sense, it folds back in on itself and doesn't provide it doesn't provide that window to the truth that I thought it would. And that's what I did find in art. And that has kept me going. Right, this is 40 years ago that I was studying physics.
So hang on, why did you feel that art how did you, that's an interesting level of maturity to be going, the truth is going to be there in art.
Because there was things that I saw in art that I believed were true. I would see a line or a Matisse painting or a Cézanne, something like that, and I would just think, my God, that is true. That is it. And I can't prove it, and it defies sort of a logical system to say, tell me why a Cézanne is good. Can't be done. But nevertheless, that held a kind of truth for me that is still there to this day.
Interesting.
And it's great because, you know, you can't prove it. I can't solve it. I don't know if it's right or not. So therefore, I can't get bored with it and want to move on to something or other else. I reckon I'll never work this out. It's something that you just keep.
Isn't that frustrating though?
Nah. Well, not for me, because if I work something out, then it gets boring and I want to try something else.
Okay.
Like when I was studying physics and stuff, it would be, I was never interested in working out the numbers of how many electron volts does it take to make an electron jump from here to there. It was just like, you can work this out? Cool. That's all I need to know. I don't want to know the answer myself. I just want to know whether or not you can find the answer. And then I'll let someone else can do that who cares about it. I don't really care. But with things like, that line, why is that line good? I could never
when were you
answer
making,
that.
what age were you making those comments about, you know, a line or a Cézanne?
Probably about 19 or 20.
Okay, so you'd finished school.
Yeah. So
and you were studying at university
yeah,
to be
so I
a
finished
physics.
school and I went in and just did a basic science degree, but I majored in mathematical physics and pure maths, partly because you didn't have to do pracs. I didn't like pracs, you know, and it was slack ass.
You just want to get off the chair.
Exactly right, you know. And I only had 3 lectures a week, so I didn't have to turn up to much and all that kind of thing. It was pretty easy. I mean, it wasn't easy; it was hard to understand. And also, if you're going to study something, why not study the most difficult thing you possibly can? Because it's like, why, you know.
I suppose so.
Nothing is tougher than art. Nothing's harder, I reckon. So why do anything else?
Wow. That's cool. I'm saying wow because firstly I struggle with the idea of being able to pick up, you know, mathematical physics as I'll just do this because I feel. And secondly, you know, the concept is nothing harder than art, and I totally get you. But for me, it's so much joy that I'm not trying to make it; I'm just trying to consume it.
Yeah.
So you moved from. When did you move to making art?
Well, I had a job. My student job was lifting tables at the Ruth Tutt Junior Art School, a lovely place.
Beautiful.
So I was like the token bloke who could lift up the trestle tables, and I'd be walking around these.
Was it a female-dominated environment?
Yeah, it was. It was a very good environment, and so I'd be, you know, walking around and little Sophie's going, David, I can't draw a rabbit. And I'm going, of course you can, Sophie. We can all draw rabbits. But if you're going to tell little Sophie that, you've got to be, you know, you've got to you got to draw the rabbit. It's got to come to the point where the rabbit gets drawn.
And it's got to be a reasonable rabbit.
Well, this is it.
Something enough to fool Sophie.
Yeah, no. Ruth was wonderful. She would, parents would come in and say, "Oh, Sophie is so talented," and Ruth would say, "Oh, all our children are so talented. She'll fit right in." You know, it was such a delight. It was really a lovely place. And Ruth was a tremendous mentor in a sense, in a way that I didn't realise at the time, because when I was doing this and I told little Sophie that she could draw the rabbit, and then it was my turn to give the lesson. So I became not the table lifter, I became one of the teachers, which I loved. And I knew that I liked teaching, and I went into teaching, and I loved, you know, because you make money tutoring kids in maths after lectures and stuff. But it was her support or her recognition in what she saw that I could do that gave me the confidence to think that I could do this.
Right.
So it was a bit like, oh, David, you can actually do this. And I don't think I've ever been a very good drawer, or I'm quite good at colour. And
they say anyone can learn to draw. Do you subscribe to that?
I mean, yes, in a way I do, but I think what you need to do, to be good, it's not really about the technical facility and your hand-eye coordination and whether you can make a line in the shape that you want. You can learn to do that, but it's a bit like having something to say with it.
Right.
If you take, say, Whiteley, one of our greatest draftsmen, and his idea of, what you need to do is go and buy some charcoal and some paper, and then you lock yourself up for 6 months and you just draw, and you distort. And then once you've done that for 6 months, you're going to see something that you've never seen before. And that's his sort of advice to anyone who wanted to try it out. And there's something in that. I think Whiteley's interesting for a lot of reasons. His use of perspective, for example, is very, and it fits in, and that fitted in with what I was studying in pure maths, because I reckon he used a curvilinear, like a hyperbolic perspective, to actually draw the eye point, to draw the position of the observer inside the picture plane.
Yes.
And that's what happens if you make your straight lines go into infinity hyperbolas instead of straight lines. That's what happens, I reckon.
Think fisheye.
Yeah. No, exactly, fisheye. So if you draw a bit fisheye, to put it like that, you can bring people in. You can bring, and I tried that with some Venice stuff, trying to bring you down the canal when I was doing that sort of thing. But yeah, no, that early support from Ruth, and that experience of meeting artists who were teachers there at the Ruth Tuck Art School, that was a bit of luck. I don't know. I was thinking if I didn't, as I finish a degree, what do you got to do? You probably have to get a job. And I thought if I don't get a job, I'll just go back and start philosophy. It was what I wanted to do.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Was that a natural extension of a mix of science and art?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, no, at that point, I don't think I'd started thinking about art yet, but it was a bit like, well, okay, I thought initially, philosophy is a bit of a wank. I think I'll just stick with physics. But then I thought, physics isn't going to quite cut it. I might have to try philosophy and see what that's like. But I didn't. I got a job instead. Yeah. So there you go. But luckily, that was fun because I could still keep painting. Yeah. And, because of that support that I had in my student holiday job, I was then able to start exhibiting and take it from there.
So how do you begin to start exhibiting? What's that first step for you?
At the time, I thought, this must be because my work's okay and he reckons he can flog it, because I didn't, not having been to art school or known that sort of thing, I didn't have any access to any public spaces or that kind of exhibition opportunity. It was all, well, there's 3 galleries in Adelaide, this is in the 80s, there's Kensington, there's Green Hills, there's Tint, BMG sort of thing. And so I went to Kensington and said, can I have an exhibition, please? And he said, yes. And this was probably because in the background, a couple of the Ruth Tuck people had said, Jonathan, who was the director, I think David's going to come and approach you. And they would have said to me, I think you should, David. I would have been encouraged by people I knew who'd done it to say, we think you are up for it. And then someone would have said to Jonathan, look, this guy's, give him a go. What's the worst thing that can happen? Exactly. So, and that happened like that. But that was really my early exposure, and really most of my experience with galleries has been through commercial galleries. So in that way, it's not such an impediment that I can't say, oh, look, I'm sorry I didn't go to art school. I had to learn this. And I would have loved to have learned, I'm trying to learn all that stuff now, but or in the future. But it would have been nice to know it already. Gosh, imagine if I'd had 40 years ahead.
Well, possibly, but it might have broken you too.
It might have,
We're where we are because of what's happened.
Well, I probably got more breaks than I deserved, so, things went well.
Well, it was a different time too.
Yeah.
Tell me, when did photography sort of start becoming a part of this? Because you were painting, right, and drawing?
Yeah, I'm painting, doing watercolours and drawing. And it's funny how you go back and you don't work out at the time how things happen. But when I was a little kid, my grandfather, who's a cinematographer and everything doer, had a darkroom.
Right.
And so we would print in the dark, and I'd forgotten the smell of fixer until I went back to TAFE and we went into the darkroom and bang, I'm straight back to being 7.
Wow.
But yeah, we printed, and he gave me for my 5th birthday a little Agfa Rapid, which took 24 by 24, and the film went from one canister to another. And again, one of these early things, we all went off on a trip, and the men were taking photographs. And Dave, with his little headphone, I snuck around behind the tree and took a picture of some cygnets. And I just found that the other day. It was in a box of prints that we got. Yeah, I remember taking the picture because my grandfather printed it up. Like he made a big print of it and said, "This is a really good picture." And I was like, "Oh, okay."
Or maybe that's where it began.
Yeah, but in retrospect, and we had a dog. Like when I had this little camera, we had a crazy Kelpie, and I used to take photographs of the crazy Kelpie in the backyard and the back fence. And my mum would say, "Oh, David's taking another bloody picture of the fence again." So I thought, maybe one day I'll be able to do a series of fence photographs or something. So there was that really early that I'd forgotten about. So I knew about cameras. Like I knew what film was, and my grandfather had a Pentax Spotmatic, and I used to play with this, and he had a twin lens reflex and all this stuff. But I didn't do anything to do with photography seriously until when I was painting, and I had in my mind that it was very important to document your work. Okay. And I don't know where I got that idea, but it's something I've always done. I've always documented it. So that means...
So an extension of journaling.
Kind of, yeah.
I think your process and this is the work, and were you hoping just to remind yourself of the story of what had happened?
I reckon I had to create my own narrative because no one else was going to.
Gotcha.
And I had to kind of say, well, this is what I did here, and then I did this, and then I did that, because in that way kind of make it falsely more interesting than it really was. Yeah. By making a story about it.
Yeah. Well, that's what art is. We're telling stories. We're deciding whether sometimes it's intentional that we're going out to make it. Sometimes we're retrospectively looking back at the work and gathering it together. But you have to draw it together. Otherwise, what's the exhibition going to be?
Exactly.
And you're not old enough to have your greatest hits and have a retrospective. Yes. You know, you've got to be hitting a story.
One hit wonder category very much.
That's right. That stage. Well, that's the thing. And now, so photography becomes a way of expanding that process and explaining that process to yourself.
Yeah. So I was making a record which was teaching me about white balance and trying to get something that was representative of the artwork and wasn't just a brown mush. But then when I went back into TAFE, because I thought I'd do a little bit of study some graphic design because it was a bit fun and it was cheap. You know, you could get to use a darkroom on the back of a $60 fee or something. It was terrific. Then the smell of the fixer came back, and I was shooting black and white, and the kids were born, I think. So lots of baby photos. And I got my grandfather's enlarger and was doing prints when the kids had gone to bed, that sort of thing. And so it was coming back in. And then because I'd bought a medium format camera, this is my great entree into the world of commercial editorial photography. I'd bought an RB67 because I had a medium format enlarger that I got from my grandfather, and a guy, Dave, I need someone who can take pictures. I saw a picture of some food that you took for another friend. Can you do some stuff for our magazine? We need things like this. So that's how come I started doing editorial stuff for Wine State magazine in the early 90s, doing shots of winemakers and people in restaurants, and you go and visit them, and you'd have a chat, and you'd take their portrait, and you'd make $100, and it was money, and it was good fun. And I also got to say, "Oh yes, I'm a photographer," which is kind of cool, isn't it?
Well, back then it may have been. I don't know about now.
I'm zipping around in a drop top roller through London with a propeller in the back. That's what I'm doing. Yeah. No, that was fun, and I think one of the things that I really like, you could say it gets boring. You don't get any sympathy when you go, "Oh yes, I just went to photograph a winemaker and he gave me a bottle of wine."
No, you don't.
You don't get sympathy. It is work, but you don't get any sympathy. Saying, or "Oh yes, I had to eat this yummy thing that was out there on the plate." But I thought, I still think it's a real privilege, even if you get a bit bored with it. It's a privilege to get that insight into the lives of the people you're photographing, and you get a trust because you're together, you're a team, you're working on the same thing, and you're getting to see. It's quite interesting who knows what a commercial kitchen's like. I don't want to spend 5 years doing an apprenticeship to be a chef to find that out. Yeah. But it's very nice when you are invited in and you get to see what's happening, and you get to meet these people, and you wouldn't have met them otherwise. I mean, you might have met them, but you wouldn't have got to see what their work was all about. And
it's one of those tremendous privileges of photographers we forget about.
I reckon. Yeah.
And, you know, we saw at Shimmer Chris Oaten's series of pictures of the restoration of the pipe organ at St. Peter's Cathedral and the stained glass work. And then he reminded us that he does time-lapse. And so, I mean, I love watching a building go up, and you never get to see behind those screens.
Yes. Yeah.
And so you get to see that. As a photographer, you get to witness these things, and you're on the sidelines and you're welcomed in. In fact,
exactly. Yep.
And if you play your cards right, you actually get to learn something if you're curious.
Yeah.
So you've got this eternal curiosity, do you? Is that what's pushing you
I think
along?
that's it. I mean, if you ever do, because my daughters are both doing postgraduate stuff now, so they're doing their little tests about what's your personality like, what's your interests, and if I ever do those tests, it's learning is always the thing that comes up top of the
That's
list.
great.
So it was really just wow, I'm learning something from this. It's fascinating, and I mean it's a nice connection, because visual art can be very solitary, and it can be long time between things happening. Like if you are working on getting a show together, that's maybe a year to do that. And a lot of that time throughout the year, nothing much is going right. So it can be very demoralising, pain in the ass. If you nip out and you take 3 photographs of 2 chefs and a winemaker, and you've done something useful, you've earned a bit of money, and you've ticked that one off, that job is done. It's great. It sort of keeps you going. It's like having normal things. You can do normal stuff. You don't have to do this esoteric arty bullshit that's you're not going to see any benefit from for a year, if then, and it might all fall in a heap, and you're just experimenting this idea. You don't know if that's going to work or it's not going to work. So having a little bit of grounding in the real sort of life of something that is useful is good, I reckon.
What else keeps you going with the art? I mean, you exhibit quite regularly.
Yeah. The way I would do it is I would book up a show. I would book a show with no work, and then hope that I could make the work, because it would be embarrassing.
Can you still do that? I mean, if you've got a reputation, you can, but how, if you're a young artist now, surely you would need to show the gallery, this is my intention.
Yeah, I think, well, for example, a show that I had in 95 or something, the first coming back from Venice the first time, when Margot and I were married, we holidayed in Europe, and we spent a couple of weeks in Venice, and I had some sketches. So I thought, wow, love this. This is fantastic, Venice, man. And so I took my sketches, and I'd worked up a couple of little watercolour-y things, and I went to see Green Hills, as it then was still existing, and said, can I have a show? And they said, yeah, we'll give you a show like 6 months' time or something. And maybe I'd said to them, I'm going back to Venice this December to do more work. Can I have a show? Something I would have said.
Yeah.
And they said, yep. And so then I went to...
So they must have seen some commercial value possibly as a gallery?
I guess, well, this is the thing. They go, maybe they think, these look nice. They're just nice watercolours. People buy them or something. I'm not quite sure. A combination of things.
It's a little bit of the ugly side of things, but I often look at it and go, how does this work? And
it's how does it work? I wish I knew how it worked.
Yeah,
it's great. I mean, be good to know. But in the commercial galleries, and they need to think they can sell. They need to think that you're not a complete pain in the ass to work with.
Yes, of course.
But also, they're not going to keep their doors open if they're not selling stuff.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of that. And then having one show booked up, I went to a gallery in Melbourne and said, oh, look, by the way, I'm having a show in Adelaide at this quite good gallery. Can I have one with you as well?
Springboarding, right? Yeah,
of course. But on a Ponzi scheme, because there's nothing underneath.
Ponzi scheme. That's hard, isn't it?
That's right. But anyway, so then turning up booking an apartment. This is great fun. You book an apartment in Venice for a month. What could be better than that? In the middle of bloody winter. Yes, and it was so cold. But it's never colder than 0 because it's so close to the sea. So, but the bad thing was that it's not that much daylight. However, I could sit out there for 30 minutes before I froze to death. So my drawing time was limited, which is good because I get bored easily. So drawing for half an hour was about all I could do, and then I'd take the paper back and paint it in my apartment. But the pressure thing, I was there for a month. In the first 2 weeks, I got nothing.
So were you panicking at that stage?
I think I passed the panic stage and just thought shit, it is what it is. What's going to happen? And then I freed up and bam, painting a day. So it started happening. So there's that combination, I think, of to me, it's different for everybody, but I need that pressure to make the work happen. Otherwise, I wouldn't bother to do it. I'd just be trying to solve problems in my head. Is it possible to do this? What would theoretically a watercolour of this canal look like? How would I draw it? And until you've got to think, well, I need 12 of these in 14 days, you better go and do one.
And I suppose 4 weeks, if you had given yourself 2 weeks, it may have been a different story.
I don't know. I reckon it would have been a disaster. But it would have been a different thing.
Yeah.
It's very hard to say because I would have been thinking differently if I knew I only had 2 weeks. I don't know. What would happen?
A lot more pressure on.
Yeah. So that work, that sort of pressure I like, because it also means that you just have to, I like thinking, well, are you going to do this or not? And if you're going to do it, there reaches a point where you have to just say, well, it's done. You know, you can't think, I can do this 5 more times.
So it's an artificial stop for you as well.
Yeah.
Well, not an artificial. It's an actual stop because, as I understand it, leaving something alone and stopping is one of the hardest things an artist can do because you keep fiddling with it.
Well, this is a great thing about watercolours. You have to stop because you just screw them up if you touch them. Or the way I used my technique, it was all at once. I'd put all the paint on wet at once and I'd so the different paints with different chemical compositions push each other around on the paper in a certain way. So that if you put a blob of oxide of chromium, that stops everything. You put a blob of Payne's grey, it goes zhoof, and then shoots right across to the other side of the page. And, you put a nice bit of cadmium yellow, it's all sticky and it holds everything down. So I'd have to put all these things on wet and then just walk away, not even look at it. Because, I'm sure that looking at it didn't really affect it, but you go, because if I'm looking at it, I'm going to be tempted to touch it. I'm going to be tempted to do this. No. I put it under the bed where I can't even see it, and it's going to dry nice and slowly because it's cold here, and I'll come back and look at it tomorrow. And then either it'll be okay or it's not. And you ditch it or you'd use it. And I really like that. That suits my way of thinking.
Because you think when you're painting, you're constructing and you're editing as you go and you're over painting back. Because watercolours, it's bang.
It's bang. This way of working is. And some watercolour is you apply a wash and then another wash. And that was never. And that's the way I'd paint in oil or acrylic or whatever. But it suits my personality. I don't know. It's an expression of how I see it. And also I'm just I think you've got to play to your strengths, and my strength is not amount of patience and redoing. It's pretty much saying, okay, that's as good as it's going to get.
And you're happy with the stress and it's good stress. It's not not panic stress that's making your life difficult.
No, well, I think it shouldn't be making your life difficult because really you're not playing for big stakes. It's not like I'm walking along a cliff top and I'm going to die if I fall. What might happen? People might laugh at you, or the gallery won't show you again because you haven't got the work ready, or something like that can happen. But they're not big events. And if you think they are, well, maybe if I thought they were, I'd be a better artist because I'd take it more. I'd take it more seriously. Maybe if I was all on oh my God, the knife is there, but I'll put it down. But
I think you might be lucky because I know there's plenty of people that really suffer. From that, and maybe are you a perfectionist?
No, because
right, there you go.
Oh, well, I think if I weren't.
That's not to put your work down.
No, that's not taken like that at all. But if I were not striving for perfection, then why would I be doing it? If I weren't trying to make the best possible thing that I could. Then why, go home.
So you're always striving for that platonic sublime.
Yes, and knowing that I can never get it, which is terrific.
We give yourself a free pass.
Yeah, I guess that's right.
Come on, Dave.
Well, no, this is not perfect, but then you can't get perfect, so it doesn't really matter. No, I mean, no, it's that striving. That's what makes it interesting. That's why I could never get bored, I think. Well, I haven't got bored with it for 40 years, so it doesn't, and I think I'm getting more interested in it rather than less interested.
Wow.
But, there's that striving to make something that's unattainable, or reach something that's unattainable, makes something that's unachievable, that sort of thing.
So we were talking, a few months ago with a previous body of work you were doing where you were really interested in what came together to make that image what it was, and you're looking at brush strokes.
Yeah.
And then you were looking at grain in photographs because so is that driving you now, this sort of fractal microscopic look at things?
I guess it always and it's easy to look at things that happened 20 years ago. You had no idea why they were happening, and then you go, now it makes sense. But the very early work that I was doing of these abstract landscapes, sort of aerial views that I was painting on big sheets of galvanized steel, and coming back from the first trip to Venice, where I still had to do the paintings, but I'm looking out of the window of the aeroplane as it flies from the Kimberley across the centre of Australia back down to where we are in Adelaide. I was thinking, look at that. Wow. This is fantastic. Look at that country. It's just going. This is amazing. This is Australia. It's fantastic from here. And yet I imagined if I were down there crawling along the sand and sticking my nose into the red earth, you'd see something that was equally beautiful if you were just looking at those grains. And so that made me think, how can you make something that is beautiful or successful or works on a tiny scale and then also works on a big scale? And I was splotting little tiny splodges of bright pure acrylic pigment onto these sheets of galvanized steel, so you could really go up and stick your nose against the steel and look at these tiny dots, and then you could walk back 3 or 4 meters and see the whole thing, which I thought, well, this is a bit like flying over the landscape. So, and I guess there's the problem solving thing. Is it possible to make this work? Is this going to be successful? Will it? And when people were looking at it, I don't think it was never, look at this, it's interesting, big and small. I don't want people to say, in this work, Hume is trying to do it's just react to it.
It is what it is.
You just react to it and see how that goes. But it is fascinating. And that thing about the dots, what is it that makes up the image? Okay, so there's grain in a photo, which I love, or there's pixels, which I can't make anything nice out of pixels yet, but who knows? I might, I'm not saying I'm writing it off.
They're pretty brutal, aren't they?
Yeah, I can't.
They're pretty brutal. There's some clever stuff done with them, but and maybe that's the science. I mean, that's what you walked away from. The understanding of the world is in a binary way. You walked away from because you are looking for the immeasurable, I suppose. Would that be fair?
True. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah.
So maybe pixels will never be your thing.
Yeah.
Because you keep coming back. I mean, you shoot digital all the time,
dots.
but you keep coming back to dots. You come back to grain. You keep coming back to
Well, there was one bunch of stuff I did where I took the world we live in, and I took this fantastic book that was made in the 50s, and it had these beautifully painted illustrations to illustrate the age of the dinosaurs and the Earth is born. And there was wonderful illustrations, and so I photographed those with a macro lens so that the dots, it was printed for colour.
Stochastic dot, yeah.
And so they became one of the main visual elements. So I might have say a section that was as big as a piece of 35mm film, shoot that with a 1:1 macro lens, blow that up to 900 mils across by 600 or something, and then the dots become really big and they're boom, boom, boom. And I'm not the only person to have done that. I don't think I've invented it or anything. Like you could say that a Chuck Close painting on a big scale does the same sort of thing. But that's very interesting. And then the idea of what would happen if you made your own halftone screen, and I got sheets of aluminium with holes in them that you can get, and the holes may be 1 centimetre in diameter, and then to spray coloured paint through that. And that was the dots in the Figure in the Landscape series, which I'm sort of saying, every landscape painting is a portrait of the artist. If you see Nolan's Ned Kelly, you're really seeing what Sid thinks about the Burke and Wills myth. You're seeing Sidney Nolan there.
Yes.
And so, Francis Bacon and all that kind of stuff. Oh, yes, why do you keep painting so many portraits, Mr. Bacon? Oh, they're all self-portraits, of course. It's that sort of thing. But, yeah, I reckon the surface, the interaction, and I think this is kind of why maybe I don't like pixels so much, because I like the interaction between the surface and the what makes that surface up is important. And if you put grain in, you have got the lumps. Like the grain is already there. So anything, if you're printing it out, even with those stuff that I've just been showing, those prints that make you wince when you look at them, that are CMYK.
I love them. They're signage. They're prints on a signage process.
Yeah.
And there's a ton of reasons to do that. And yours is about, you've photographed a painting.
Yeah.
And then you've used that combination of the grain and the photographic
technique.
How does the
grain play with the...
And it looks like Polaroid when you get up close to it. It's a lot of lot happening there.
Yeah. Well, and again, there's a lot of stuff that I'm thinking about, but I don't really want to try and beat people over the head with that. But it's lovely to... Well, I've just been looking at some of that work, and it's having a show. It's great. You learn. I find that as well as the punctuation of the development process of what you're thinking.
I love that idea. You're a journey, an artist making, working, enjoying, and then you need these punctuation points to push you along, I suppose, or beacons to come towards.
And then I look at these prints and think, oh, wow, I didn't expect that to happen. That's really interesting. I wonder if I can take what I have learned from seeing how that's resolved itself in that piece. How can I fold that back into what's going to happen next? So we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, I mean that recent series, visually it's beautiful. There's some playful elements, like you've got this grid of photographs that are hanging on the wall that you can rearrange, and you've actually created
fridge
magnet set. Even though the original series is not a series of fridge magnets, it has that feeling like, come along, rearrange it, make what you wish of it. And interestingly enough, that series is a series taken on the Fleuriot, and you once said that you feel there's two places you can work. Now, in all those artist talks we did, or the I don't remember, what do we call it? It was an afternoon with all the artists when everyone was doing an artist talk in a row. There was such a strong line through it all where people were working about what they knew. And this is a series of works. Was it Maiponga?
Yes,
so in the Fleuriot Peninsula,
Beach,
looking out to sea. And it was something that you said I found fascinating. You felt that this is something you are allowed to photograph.
Yeah, and this is, I still think that. And I reckon that was a really common thread. I found it fascinating listening to what everyone else was saying, because technically the work that all the people were doing couldn't have been more different, but it was such a common thread of this. I can't find a word for it, but yes, to go back, part of what I found interesting was this idea. I wonder if the fact that I've stood on this bit of sand every January for the last 30 years, I've looked out at these clouds and I've looked at the sea and is there some way that I can communicate that? So, hence taking away all the technical kind of constraints by saying I'm going to use a point and shoot camera and I'm going to mask out the place where the film goes, so it's going to be square, and I'm just going to use a shop scan, and I'm not going to color correct anything or crop it or do anything like that. I'm going to send it off and get prints at Officeworks, and I'm going to see what it is and put that on the wall, and is that going to show you something that you can get in no other way? And I don't really know the answer. I don't know whether that worked or not, but it certainly was fascinating to try.
Well, this is the thing with your work. You're having a go at an idea. You're going, can I solve this problem this way? and you get to the end of it, and it really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
What you've made is what you've made, and I think the work is beautiful on a pictorial level, and it does give you the sense of a location reviewed, understood, and I know that area quite well, and it helps me feel my feelings about it. And then you've got a couple of forgive us, but Dave and I like to call them Alice Blanches, where they're multiple exposures. Blanchoramas. Where you've basically done a multiple exposure on one piece of film, and a large piece of film.
Yeah.
6, 7?
Oh, probably
6, 8?
Sorry, the film?
Yeah.
Yeah, they'd come out, they'd be about 12 centimetres long, I guess. And I'd probably overlap 3 or 4 frames, sort of thing.
So we're not saying it's a viewfinder camera that's 12 by 6 centimetres.
No, it's a 6 by 6.
It's a 6 by 6, but as you wind it on a little bit and take an exposure, there's no real telling where one frame begins.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Except, well, there is no telling in a dark area, but in a light area you see the frame overlaps, and you get this feeling of a repeated image within one image. And you shot one from a canoe, a kayak.
Yes, my kayak.
And you got the sense of the bobbing of it.
Yeah,
and
Well, the interesting thing about that is when I first saw Alice's panoramas, I thought they're fantastic. I reckon they
we all did.
Oh, yeah, they're sensational. And I reckon it was the stuff that I can't remember what show it was, but at the time I was doing that Venice stuff where I was cutting up digital photos into the 3x3 grid, and I was trying to compress time into one image. So I was trying to take lots of bits of time and whack them into one. I thought, can you put time into this single image? And when I saw Alice's panos, I thought, time. And of course, because you make an exposure, you move the camera a little bit, you wind on a little bit, and so it's recording not that click of the shutter.
Yes.
It's recording, say, in me bobbing around in the kayak, it's probably took 30 seconds, probably a minute maybe to do.
Is that not the same as a painting where you're seeing it and the light's changing in front of you, or like in Venice where you drew something, then you went home and then you hit it with a watercolor back to your apartment? Isn't that a time recording as well?
No, I don't know, because the making of it takes a lot of time.
But it's about
it's about that moment. So
that glimpse.
Yeah, and that's what the first watercolors I did were single glimpse, single painting. Yeah. So I was walking along and I looked along this canal, and all of a sudden I saw a bridge and I saw these 2 buildings, and I did my watercolor. It took me an hour to do the watercolor, but it is of that moment.
Yes.
And so the first, then the second lot of photography, when I went back, however many years later, is it 20 years after? 20 years.
Wow.
No, from 2012 to, about 20 years. So those photographs were probably 20 years after the first stuff that I'd started doing. And there's the other place, where I feel that I can make stuff. 20 years after the first time I was there, trying to put time in. And then I saw Alice's panos, and I thought, she's trying to put time in, but I don't think that way anymore. And then when I tried doing that, I'm not trying to put time in. I'm trying to record a process of observation. Well, I guess time is in there in a way, because there's this act of observation, then there's another act, then there's another act. Yes. When we see something, we look at this bit, we look at that bit, and I reckon I've got a way to go with those, because I don't think they're really, they're too much, I'm in one place and I'm looking out, and then I'm looking in a slightly different direction, but it's not the journey through, which is when I made that little
I was going to ask you, the next thing is the video you made, which was about you moving through an environment. So tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, well, that was just one of those amazing sorts of moments of inspiration that if I get 2 of those a year, it's been a good year.
Wow.
And I was down on the beach at Normanville, and the clouds were just... Margot and I were at the end of a little trip or something, and we had to go home. And the clouds were just coming in, and I had a roll of Velvia for some reason in this little Olympus XA compact camera. And I just thought, don't know that I did think. I just thought, my God, I've just got to get this. And I realised, I hadn't realised, but I thought theoretically, if I press my finger up on the rewind button while I'm winding on, it won't pull the film through because it's released the little catch. And therefore, I should be able to put my finger on the button at the same. If I put my thumb on the rewind button, put my other finger on the crank, and then my third one winding on the winder, I should be able to get overlapping multiple exposures.
Creating a multiple exposure, one long piece of film with multiple images overlapping and the like.
So there's probably, say, 70 actuations of the shutter over the 36 frames, and all those frames overlap. And I just sat on this thing thinking, oh, I really like that, but I had no idea. And I did some of that at the beach, and then quick, we've got to go home now. We drive over my Ponga Dam. Stop the car! This is amazing.
The family must love you.
Well, luckily it was only. Well, Margot's very.
Is Margot the patient one?
Oh yes, you'd have to be, wouldn't you? No, just stop the car. Just stop. And so. That's like, I think I might, oh my God, look at these clouds. And then the mist had come in, and we made it to ALDINGA Beach, and I finished off the roll there. And I thought, this is something. But they had no use. I didn't know what to do with them, because that telling of that road trip, and it wasn't until I was trying to think of something to do with this last body of shimmer work with the little squares of the single beach things. And I thought, let's try and make a video, and that didn't work. It didn't work. And then because Janie Langford had said, okay, shimmer artists got to be prepared to put your work, do it online.
Yeah, so this is because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
This festival's on now, but there was an on and off moment there in July, August.
And I thought, I don't want that big grid of pictures that you referred to earlier.
Yes.
I don't want to put that up on a website, because it's not about looking at it on a website. It's about walking up and down past it and looking up and looking down and moving through the work. If it was going to be good on a website, I would have put it on a website, not on a wall. And then I thought, well, I can do something on an online platform. If instead of you going past the work goes past you, because you're still and you're sitting looking at your screen. So what about if I dissolve? We've got half dissolved frames anyway, because they're all overlapping. So what about if I blend those into one another and just slowly fade one to the other, and that's what I did, and it worked over 4 minutes or something. And okay, bit of fun. But I think it was quite
very beautiful.
It was quite. Well, I think it was. I'm happy that it was successful in solving that problem that I.
Yeah,
thought.
I think it's probably. I don't know. I think it probably was a little bit more than just successful. I don't know how that gets subscribed to it, but the music. Australian composer, and you had Margot play the cello for it. That all helps to know that, but the fact is, actually, it's a really beautiful piece.
Well, yeah, I'm not being sort of coy, going, oh no, it's not beautiful. But seriously,
I didn't call it sublime.
No, you didn't call it sublime. But,
actually, it is sublime.
But going back to talking about a single frame shot from my Ponga Beach, and you said, oh, that's a beautiful shot, and I'm thinking, when I'm making this, I'm doing everything I can to really make this a nothing photo. I'm not using any I'm using this. All I'm doing is walking down to the beach, kind of. I don't know. I'm just walking down there, clicking the shutter, and then walking back to the beach house. Who could not do that? So, in what way is that making something? Who could not do that? Which I find really interesting, because if it does make something beautiful, then how did that happen?
Well, a lot more than just walking down taking the picture.
Well, that's all I did physically.
No, but you didn't mentally and emotionally.
Yeah,
you did a lot more to it.
Yep.
And then you treated some differently, and you involved the painting, and you.
Yeah. Well, no, that's all. That's true. But that first act of just pointing a little camera.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And a lot of people have a problem with photography for that very reason.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question. If that, first of all, does it make something that's beautiful? How does it make something that's beautiful? Why and the only thing I can kind of come back with is, well, look, I've looked at this beach for 30 years, and I know that now would be a good time to go down there and go click, and I'll come and I'll just, once I've done that, I'll go and have a beer, and when now wouldn't be a bad time to do, and over the course of 5 days or a week or something.
36 beers for all of it.
Well, it's a holiday.
Was it 20,
no, I didn't have to have
24 mil square.
Didn't have to have one beer of a photograph. See if you can get through the whole
It might
roll in
change the
5
show.
minutes. Yes. But that is interesting. And
well, okay. So I want a question about the video that you made for that. How do you feel about video as a piece of art? Now, I mean, G and I, when we spoke about this on the podcast, we both like, I don't want to put video artists down in any way, but what are you making? What does a collector collect? Like, what does an institution collect? How do they display it? What was your intention for, what is it? Is it just a bit of fluff on the side, or is it a real thing?
I reckon I was trying to make a real thing, but also I was just trying to have a bit of a play with this idea. And if it comes back to, say, looking at, say, Collins' Banal Marie book, and you resolve something in one way, and then it has another life, you take that idea and you put it up and you put it on the wall, and it's a slightly different way. And so the same idea, like I could make this, I made this little video, it took me 30 minutes in iMovie and boom, it's done. Now just imagine that I get a phone call from the Biennale and David, we've got a pavilion, we'd like to give you the Australia Pavilion. I'd go, this will be fun. What we might do is we might print these up as, say, 1.5 by 1 meter on translucent panels, and we'll mount them slightly overlapping, and we'll go around so that instead of looking at it on a screen, people can have a slow walk. And I go, well, that would be fun to do, but it would cost 50 grand to make it. And so if you're going to pay for it, we can do it. Otherwise, maybe I'll just think, well, I got a video and that's kind of nice. So,
well, interesting. Because I struggle with it as I just said before. What is it? And it's clearly, I don't think it's fair to say it's where we are going, but it has to be considered. And it makes me feel like a real Luddite that I can't see and feel the video piece as being. And I remember a few years ago, went to Rochester and I met the gang from the Image Permanence Institute, talking to them about, and they advise people on collecting and institutions on the archival and storage and ink ratings and all that kind of stuff. They're an independent group. Yes, they're funded like most university organisations are, but they're a research group. And they were asked to curate, not so much curate, but be a part of the discussion of the curation of an on-screen workpiece. And I spoke to the director of the centre and I said, well, what did you do? He said, well, the question was, like, it was originally shown on this little CRT screen. And it was an early computer installation piece. Really, we need to archive the screen, and that because the way that the person showed the work, it was this sort of lo-fi thing, and we start putting it on, a 4K display, or it's another thing, isn't it?
Well, and it's not a new. I mean, I think the sort of quick answer is that the institutions are always behind the times. They have to be, because what's happening has not yet made it into institutions. So it's always, so. Duchamp's fountain, there's a good piece of virtual art that was never actually shown. So if he says, I'm writing mit on the side of a urinal that I just bought from the shop and I'm submitting it to this show which has got no selection criteria, all you've got to do is pay the entry fee, New York 1917. Oh no, says the committee, we're not accepting this. It's not art. So then they hide it, and Stieglitz takes a photograph of it, puts it up in his gallery in Manhattan. People talk about it, so it's a bit like, Duchamp's got a couple of influencers working for him. And then, so you go, hashtag urinal. And so now, there's one in the Tate, but it's not the real one because they
destroyed it.
Yeah, it was in Duchamp's studio, and he smashes it up before he leaves New York or something like that. So someone makes a a ceramic copy of the original porcelain or something or other, and there are 4. So if you're going into the Tate Modern and you're seeing Duchamp's fountain, you're seeing a copy made in 1960, and there's so many meta kind of levels going on in that sort of thing. I guess I reckon some of the stuff works and some of it lasts and some of it doesn't, and Duchamp does, and I don't know so much about Damien Hirst and Jeff Koons sort of thing, but who cares what I think? Yeah, well, but I mean, we're not arguing about Duchamp. Everyone loves Duchamp, but there's, I'm sort of probably more on the side of Robert Hughes when it comes to the other guys who view him as, Anyway,
so where are you going next? What's the you're reaching for the sublime? What's the next thing? What's boiling in the pot?
Well, I'm saying to clouds at the moment. I think this is just evolving. In fact, Izzy was saying, Dad, you are not taking photos of my wedding because you'd come back at 2 photos of a cloud and say, Izzy, the skies were amazing. Did you see that? But it's a bit like if I can just do the beach thing, I wonder if I can just do a cloud. And I was thinking about this riding over here today. I was wondering about this printing on canvas, which is, it's a crime against all it's good and decent is abominated by that. But
it's never stopped you in the past, David.
No. But then I thought, well, maybe you could, if you look at what Turner's technique was, for example, and he'd put a bit of impasto on underneath, and then he'd rub stuff with a rag a bit, and then he'd get up to the oil washes on the top. I was sort of thinking, what about if you start off with the CMYK rendering on canvas first, and then you start overworking that in oils, and you play with that idea of how much comes through in a visual sense. So what you're seeing, how much of a print or how much of paint are you looking at? And you also play with that and the idea of how much am I sort of corrupting this image? What is this process? How much can I say this is a painting, or how much are you going to say, oh, this is cheating because you're copying? A bit like, say Warhol doing the big colour by numbers works of boats and stuff, just blowing them up and painting them. So that would be interesting. But I reckon it's got to be something. I was thinking, is it boring? Is it too boring just to do paintings of clouds?
No, I don't think it is.
Well, looking at the people who were talking in the Shimmer Forum, it was like if the passion is there, like G's Chrysalises, for example, or Haydn's The Moon. It's you look at that and you think, well, what he's done is just he's worked out how to kind of capture that fascination and that beauty that he sees, and he's prepared to go and do the work to get, and everyone's just kind of going, oh wow, I was sitting next to a woman who'd made a special trip. She wanted to ask a question. She wanted to, she was there for the bite sort of thing, and it was great. It was so lovely to think, wow, this is working really well. This is, this stuff is, I'm looking at it thinking this is great, but it's affecting people in such, so much. I think she was worked as a photographer's assistant or something. So she was into photography, and she's got, I'm coming here to see this. So that stuff is wonderful.
So I think your discussion about the original works of the glimpses in Venice, where you walk, you cross a bridge, and you see someone walking somewhere, and you kind of capture this little snippets. If you think about it, every one of those people who spoke at that forum, and every artist and everyone looking at their work, is all getting a glimpse of things in a different way. And yes, I don't think there's particularly a fan base for clouds out there, but that's not how you work. If they're fascinating and you're in the interesting, and they certainly are of a fractal nature, clouds. As you start looking at them and putting them together and pulling them apart, you see different things. They change before your very eyes.
Maybe I could do puppies or something.
Puppies.
See, I used to do irises. This was the thing. I did watercolor irises back in the 90s.
So you started where you're meant to end.
Yeah.
That's what the old guys are meant to go.
Well, I got good. I got good at irises. I can say this now. I couldn't do one today if I tried, but I got to the point where I was just putting on pure pigment, like I would use on watercolor on lovely Arches, 600 gram cold pressed, and I would not draw. I would just use like a brush painting, and I'd use pure cadmium yellow, ultramarine, oxide chromium, cad yellow, a bit of cobalt turquoise, and I'd go boom, 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 and make them. Like I wouldn't need to draw an outline. I could just, I'd looked at them so long that I knew how to do them. And once I'd done that, I kind of had to stop because it would have just been, I got to the point where there was nowhere further to go.
Yes.
And I would just have been going through, and they were quite popular, like people would always buy them, but I had to stop making them because they would have become just me
cliche.
doing a cliche, an impersonation of, this is an impersonation of me doing an iris. It just, they lost what it was, that, oh, is it possible to do this? And I'd kind of made it to that point where it was possible. And then I had to stop because I'd solved that problem, if that makes sense. So,
yeah. So your next problem may be clouds.
Could be.
I
reckon clouds. Although I'd like the idea of, so I was looking at that CEZANNE stuff and
Conversation with CEZANNE was your last show or show before last?
That was the one before this, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you're monkeying with some photographs.
Yeah, well, I had those
of a still life.
Yeah, well, I had those single fruits. They're lovely prints, and that was about just looking at something and taking something, and so. But again, that was interesting because I just shot those. So I was painting in the style of Cézanne, based on not trying to copy what I thought his technique was, but I read, because Cézanne hardly said anything. He never, there's very little recorded. But if you read, everyone's got, oh, well, Cézanne said this, Cézanne said that, no. And it's all crap. Because he didn't,
opinion.
Yeah, he didn't say any of that. People attribute it to him. Oh, well, at the dinner party, someone will say what he said, but it's not, So I read his letters, like his complete correspondence throughout his life.
Yeah.
And I only used that. I only used the words that he had said. So once I'd read that, then I read the definitive biography of him, which was really good. But I ignored anything that was not directly in his recorded that he said. So in trying to paint like that, I was just influenced by his statement about observe nature, just observe. And so if you, you can see stuff in his work. You can see that he is the father of Cubism, because you can see that he looks at something from one place and then he paints the rest of it from another bit of the same still life from another place. And you can really see that Picasso and Braque jumped on top of that.
Yes.
But I'm not sure that he would not have said, oh, I'm the father of Cubism. He would have just gone off in a grump and gone and painted another view of. So I don't really ascribe to all this. Oh well, he was clearly thinking this. He was clearly thinking that. I don't buy that.
Well, that's why you call that a conversation with.
Yeah.
And you've got a little essay or a little booklet that was talking. Sort of imagining a conversation and sort of working this stuff out. And
that the photographs, just the single fruits. That was like a precursor to the later stuff of Down the Beach, because that is, I have looked, when you have drawn something, this is the thing, if you've spent the time that it takes to draw and paint something, you really know what it looks like. Yeah. So, if you look at a mountain, you've seen it, but if you've sat there, not just sat there for an hour, but sat there with your pencil and you've looked at every little crack and you've tried to see the relationship between all the shapes and where they fit in and how this works and how that works, then you know what it looks like. And I thought, I spent so many hours looking at bloody lemons and stuff, drawing them. I should be able to make a photograph of that. Yes. And I used that crappy Impossible Project sort of film, and then blew the curves to shit so that it would be dark and and get some colour and all that. Yeah. But I thought what that's about if it works, if that becomes a successful piece, that's about that act of observation.
Yes.
And so, and this is this stuff that I'm playing around with the expired films and stuff that G gave me, is like, well, let's take, because when you see, if you look at a photograph of something and it looks like a normal photo, you forget that you're looking at a photo, I think, because that's what photos look like. They look like that. So
and it's as close to reality as the engineers can make it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because we've left in the hands of the scientists.
Yes. They've sharpened their pencils and they've said, they've said, oh, look at that tint there. That's what it should be. So they're
only getting better, by the way. They're perfection.
I know. I'm still finding it pretty hard to look at digital stuff these days. It kind of almost hurts me to. But so this, looking at the lemon, I'm thinking, well, is this? It's about, if I'm taking a picture of the beach, which is just really walking down and going click, but it's not. It's about going to that beach for 30 years. Is putting a lemon on a bench and going click? Is that about just taking that frame, or is that really about having looked at it for so long and thought about it and thought, well, I've tried to paint bloody, pomegranates and pears and stuff, and this is what my photo is. How does that fit in with the whole sort of process of observing? Yeah. But in the end, it's got to be something that sort of works as an image. But whether or not all that process helps it work is what I'm finding. That's what I don't think I can answer. And if I could answer it, well, I'd give up. I'd have to go and do something else. If I go, solved that.
Next.
Yeah, next. Yeah. No, sorry.
Does make you wonder, and this will be the last thing because we've popped over our hour.
Oh, okay. Right.
I was just thinking that our conversations over the years about Henri Cartier-Bresson and his work, how long did he look at things to fully understand it? And was that a part of that work? Tony Kearney, whose work was there, was like, I spent 2 minutes with every person he photographed. And we're going to interview Tony and talk to him about that.
Yeah.
And that was like the antithesis of everyone else there who talked about knowing the subject. And I'm sure Paris was HCB's world and knew inside out. But it's almost the antithesis of a decisive moment because it's happened. It's not going to happen again.
Yeah.
You can't recreate that. You've got to be there waiting for it to happen.
Well, this is what I reckon it's interesting. Like, don't let Tony tell you how he took the pictures. Interrogate him and find out how he really took them. Because
there's more to it than that.
There's more to it than that. Because if he says, I just walk up in 2 minutes, click, it's done. That's, if it was that easy, everyone would be doing it, and they're not. So that's why I think these conversations are interesting. It's much nicer if the artist is asked questions and probed rather than just, I'm going to read my statement about what I do, which is, that's not very interesting.
Yeah, agreed. Well, David, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful hour.
It was jolly good fun. Yeah.
It was good sport, hey?
Yeah.